that we've finished the vertebrate pests, the mice and the rats, we can look at invertebrate pests, which tend to be smaller, and also there's a huge range of them. We'll start first with the insects, cockroaches, flies, and mosquitoes. I think today we'll probably be able to cover cockroaches and flies, and we might have to leave mosquitoes till next week. So the learning objectives for this lecture, or this part of the lecture, is to identify and describe cockroaches, flies, and possibly mosquitoes if we have time. This is based on their morphology, their biting habits, their life cycle, their distribution, and associated human diseases, if there are any, and their control and prevention using integrated pest management strategies. You may have learned about insects before. However, this may have been a while ago, perhaps in elementary school. So here is a reminder. Insects have exoskeletons, which are protective shells covering their bodies. This is unlike us as humans, who have inner skeletons that give us structural strength. There are 3 parts to their bodies: the head, thorax, and abdomen, 3 pairs of legs, and a pair of antennae. So sometimes it looks like they have 8 legs, but they don't. They just have the 6 and the 2 antennae that stick out from the top of their heads, which should not be mistaken for legs. They also have pairs of compound eyes that are made up of many tiny lenses. So the first type of insects we're going to look at are cockroaches. There are more than 3,500 species around the world, and they rarely cause structural damage, unlike termites or carpenter ants. Unfortunately, they like garbage and sewage. So because of those practices, they can contaminate our food if they actually walk on the food or defecate on the food. Generally, they prefer warm environments. However, in Canada, they have been found everywhere, even up in as far north as Nunavut. Well, most of the cockroaches have originated from the tropics. However, the ones that are in Canada have adapted to our way of life and like our heated apartments or houses. Like rodents, they're nocturnal, and you generally don't see them in the bright light of day. And if you do see them in the daytime, it's because there's probably a very heavy infestation, or there might have been a disturbance which causes them to crawl out of their hiding spots. They may be introduced into the environment through food supplies that have been delivered to that particular facility. And because they're so small, they probably have gone unnoticed. Sometimes, though, they may migrate along plumbing lines from other parts of the facility or other buildings. There are 4 major types of cockroaches in North America, and we'll go through them in a minute. In terms of public health, are cockroaches associated with human diseases? Well, they are. They do cause allergies, especially in children, and may trigger asthmatic attacks. But from a public health viewpoint, they will generally cause food to become contaminated, and they've been demonstrated to carry Salmonella, E. coli, Streptococcus, Staphylococcus, and sometimes even Entamoeba and poliovirus in mainly tropical areas. They have, however, not been linked to any large disease outbreaks. And also, they have a repulsive odor, so you can tell if a cockroach has actually walked over your rice or any of your grains, because they can leave a scent that is unappealing. So as I mentioned, we're going to go through the 4 major types of cockroaches that are found in North America. The first one is called the German cockroach. It is actually very widespread in North America, and it's probably the one you'll encounter most in your public health practice if you're approached by the public with a cockroach to identify. They're also one of the smallest cockroaches. They're only 10 to 15 millimeters long, and it just means that sometimes they may be confused with other insects. What is a very distinct feature that they have that just identifies or helps in their identification are these 2 long stripes on the back of their heads. It's not actually the head, it's actually called the pronotum, which is part of their thorax. And these two bands, almost like tiger stripes, help to really identify them. They can live for up to 4 to 5 months. The second type of cockroach is the oriental cockroach. They are very different in size and shape to German cockroaches and are much larger, about 2.5 times in size. They vary in color from dark brown to shiny black, and of all the cockroaches, they look more like beetles than typical cockroaches. They can live for 2 years and are usually found in washrooms, where there are leaky pipes because they like moist environments. Now, the third cockroach is the American cockroach, and it's probably the cockroach that you've seen most often. As the name suggests, it's a North American insect, and it's actually the largest cockroach of the 4 major types of cockroaches found in Canada. It is about 3 to 5 times the size of a German cockroach, usually reddish brown in color, and can sometimes fly around, but not like a typical fly or anything. It just is a sluggish fly and flies very short distances and has a lifespan of about a year and a half. The last of the 4 major types of cockroaches are the brown banded cockroach, or Sapella. They are really small, just like German cockroaches, the same size, 10 to 14 millimeters long. They're actually pale brown and they have bands across their wings. They're one of the more difficult cockroaches to identify because they don't have real distinguishing features, and the bands across the wings sometimes are not as prominent. Like in the male cockroach over here, you don't really see the bands as clearly as you do in the female cockroach. They have short lifespans like German cockroaches. They can fly, and sometimes they may be seen during the day. So cockroaches do not have a complete metamorphosis. Their metamorphosis is considered incomplete because they lack the larval and pupal stages. So they don't have a worm type stage and they don't have a static stage in a cocoon. The life cycle starts with an egg. It's called the ootheca, and that is laid by the female. It is actually really large in comparison to the insect or the female cockroach. And it contains anywhere from 16 to 38 eggs, depending on the type of cockroach. When the nymphs hatch, that's what they're called, these baby cockroaches, the numbers that hatch or emerge just totally depends on the type of cockroach. And then after that, they start molting, which means that they keep shedding their skin. And if there's heavy infestations, you might see some of these empty shells, their exoskeleton, of various sizes as they keep molting. And this is, again, depending on the type of cockroach, they can molt anywhere from 5 to 10 times before they become full-size adults. Integrated pest management can be used to control and prevent cockroach infestations. The first thing to do is to clean up the area. Pick up garbage, clean up any spills, then vacuum cracks and crevices where cockroaches hide. This is different from rodents because cockroaches do not carry hantaviruses, so it's safe if aerosols are generated. Then clean up any remaining clutter, especially old newspapers, magazines, and boxes, since they like to lay their eggs there. And then the next steps are to seal any gaps in walls to prevent cockroaches from crawling in and out and eliminate their hiding spaces. Also, fix any leaky plumbing to prevent moist environments that will attract them, especially oriental cockroaches. Other integrated pest management approaches include monitoring. This is checking to see if there are live sightings of cockroaches or dead ones in the traps. Also, look for the presence of egg cases and frass, which is debris that contains cockroach excrement. In restaurants, check any deliveries, especially imported produce from tropical parts of the world. You can also use physical control, such as traps. These are usually sticky boards or poison baits, which will help to monitor and control these pests. Chemical control can also be used. Pyrethroids are naturally derived from chrysanthemums and attack the insect nervous system, causing paralysis. Pyrethroids such as permethrin are synthetic analogs. These chemicals can be sprayed, but even though it's quick to apply, it's a short-term solution because it tends to disperse the cockroaches to other nearby areas. This is a real problem in apartments because the cockroaches will go to a neighboring apartment and then return after a while. There are also other pesticides such as borax, which is a salt form of boric acid, and diatomaceous earth. They both act as desiccants and dry out the insects, thus killing them. The diatomaceous earth should be pesticide grade and not the type that's used in swimming pools or water filters, which is too fine and can irritate lung tissue. Prolonged exposure can result in silicosis. And now we come to another group of insects, and that's the flies. These can be divided into two major groups: the non-biting flies, such as house flies, which are probably the ones we're most familiar with, and the non-biting flies, which are quite different and generally found outdoors. We will have a closer look at them on the next few slides. Unlike cockroaches, flies undergo complete metamorphosis. They have the larvae or wormy stage and the pupae stage where they cocoon up. Houseflies will usually lay their eggs in animal or vegetable waste, whereas black flies require running surface water and will lay their eggs in creeks. After they pupate, flies develop into adults within the hardened shell of the pupae, emerging after a week to start flying around. Let's look at the first group of non-biting flies. These are the cluster flies. And as the name suggests, they cluster together. You'll probably notice that around springtime, in a sunny window, you'll start having groups of flies buzzing around, and you can probably hear them and see them. And you might think they're house flies, but they're not. They have a different sort of structure. They're quite furry, especially around the thorax, and there are actually different colors to the house flies. These flies are non-pathogenic in the sense that they don't really cause any problems to, especially public health, on the public health side. So they do not bite, they do not transmit any human disease, and they don't cause any damage to the structure of our homes. They actually are parasites of earthworms, so that's the only threat, animals that they threaten. The next group of non-biting flies are blowflies, sometimes called bluebottles, because their abdomens have a bright blue sheen on them. They are the same size as cluster or houseflies, perhaps a little bit larger. They do buzz very loudly, so they might attract your attention. They don't bite, but they have larvae or maggots that feed on rotting tissue, and this may cause a condition called myiasis, which I'll talk about on the next slide. In the colder winter months, they may colonize the carcasses of dead animals, so from a hygiene perspective, you don't want these flies landing on your food. Cutaneous myiasis is very rare in North America. It is more of a Central or South American problem, where they have different types of flies such as the screwworm or botfly that lay their eggs on wounds or parts of the body with softer tissue that's sheltered, such as the ears or nose. Some flies might lay their eggs on mosquitoes, so when they bite, there is broken tissue for the maggots to get in. Due to the large number of maggots that sometimes hatch, the site becomes irritated and painful, and bacterial infections may occur on top of the infestation, creating a very nasty situation. Myiasis is rare in North America. It is called accidental because the blowflies here do not normally lay their eggs on live animals or humans. It mainly affects stray animals that are weak and unable to fend for themselves, and sometimes even babies who may be asleep when the flies land on them to lay their eggs. I haven't put this picture in the handout because there may be copyright issues. This wound, myiasis, is an ulcerated lesion of a cancer patient. Blowflies are attracted to the discharge from wounds and ulcers, and if they are successful in laying their eggs there, they will hatch to produce a large number of maggots in the site. In order to resolve the situation, the maggots need to be removed, either manually or surgically, if they are embedded deeper in the tissue. Houseflies are the very last group of non-biting flies. They are the most common type of flies in our houses and restaurants. They don't bite. They have mouthparts that are spongy-like at the base, which allows them to suck up food which they have softened with their saliva. Houseflies are around 6 millimeters long or a quarter inch and are roughly the same size as clusterflies and blowflies, so it's easy to get these three types of flies mixed up. Houseflies are a problem because they can carry more than 1 million bacteria on their legs, which are quite furry, allowing bacteria to attach to them. They also like to fly around excrement and feces, so they can become contaminated with bacteria that cause gastrointestinal illness, such as Shigella, Salmonella, E. coli, and Vibrio cholera. Also, they regurgitate their food to soften it, so this is something we don't want to have on the food that we're eating. So let's turn our attention to the biting flies. The first type of fly is the horsefly. Unlike all the flies that we've encountered so far, these are very large flies. They're about 5 times the size of a housefly. They can be distinguished by their furry grayish thorax with long dark lines and dark-colored abdomens. They are generally found in midsummer, which can be a problem for campers and those who need to be outdoors in rural areas for occupational reasons, such as farmers and fruit pickers. However, it's only the females that bite because they need the blood meal to produce eggs. They have mouthparts that are very different to those of houseflies. Their mouthparts have pairs of cutting blades that are very sharp. That's why their bites are so painful, because they cut the skin open to let the blood ooze out before using a small sponge-like area of their mouthparts to lap up the blood. The good thing is, North American horseflies do not transmit human diseases. However, their bites may cause swelling and itch, which may lead to skin infections with staph or strep bacteria. The next group of flies are deer flies. They're much smaller than horseflies and are slightly larger than houseflies. They're yellow in color and have dark bands or stripes running down their thorax and across their abdomen and wings. So they look a bit like bees, but they're not in the bee family. They actually belong to the same family as horseflies, the tabenid family. They emerge in spring, and like horseflies, only the females bite to get the blood meal for egg production. They're also not fussy about the animals they bite, and will feed on deer and smaller mammals such as rabbits and rodents. Unlike horseflies, they're associated with the transmission of human disease in North America. One of these diseases is tularemia, which we will cover at the end of the semester in the vector-borne disease lecture. The last group of biting flies that are found in North America are the black flies in the Simulum family. They're very tiny, only half the size of deer flies. They have a humpback shape and may sometimes be confused with fruit flies or gnats because of their small size. However, they bite as the females require blood for egg production. They also emerge in the summer, which makes them a nuisance because that's the time when we go outdoors for recreational and occupational activities. Like horseflies, they don't transmit human disease in North America, but in other parts of the world they can transmit diseases such as onchocerciasis, also known as river blindness, which is caused by a parasitic nematode. Since we're looking beyond North America, let's look at the very last group of flies. These are the tsetse flies in the Glossina family. They're only found in rural Africa. Both males and females bite. The main reason we're looking at them is because they can transmit sleeping sickness, which is also known as African trypanosomiasis. This disease is caused by a flagellated protozoan, which we'll learn about later on in the semester. The IPM strategy for controlling flies, firstly, is through exclusion. Bug screens that are properly fitted should be placed on all windows to prevent flies from flying in. These should have a fine mesh that is small enough that flies cannot get through. Any crevices or holes should be filled with caulking. Garbage bins and trash cans should be covered tightly. This leads into sanitation, where any organic waste, such as compost, should be removed on a regular basis to prevent flies from being attracted to the area. Insecticides are not always necessary or recommended for controlling flies. It is best to avoid them, especially in the kitchen where food is being prepared. Instead, it is better to use physical control, such as sticky tapes, sometimes called fly strips, that are quite effective because they have scents or pheromones that attract flies to them. UV lights are also effective, as the light attracts the flies, and some of them may also have a high voltage charge grid and are called bug zappers. Although fly swatters are used a lot, they are not recommended, especially around food preparation areas. What happens is when you swat a fly, you squish it and all the internal contents spill out, causing potential contamination with foodborne pathogens.